Depending on which news source you read, the economy is either doing better than ever and everyone is super excited recovery is here at last, or we're on the verge of a major economic catastrophe. Now, I am of the personal opinion, based on all the stories and the sources I have for you today, that we are facing a very serious economic crisis. It can be averted, but it would seem the only options we have are to kick the can down the road and hope that we can keep kicking the can down the road. My friends, the U.S. debt ceiling limit has been reached. Congress has not raised the debt ceiling, which means the U.S. cannot take on any more debt to pay off its obligations and may be on the verge of a default for the first time in like 100 years or something to that effect. The effects of which are unknown. Most experts can't really give us a general idea of what would happen if we do default, but most seem to agree it would mean chaos in the global markets. It could mean recession, depression. One company doesn't get the money that it's owed by the U.S. government, which triggers a loss of confidence because the U.S. government can't pay off its debts, and then everyone kind of freaks out. You see, the debt ceiling was suspended in 2019. It was frozen around $22 trillion. I guess what they're saying now is that because we're at like $28 trillion in national debt and the suspension ended, that's the limit. And Congress has to approve the U.S. taking on even more debt. At the same time this is happening, we have the end of the Eviction Moratorium, which means millions of people are going to get kicked out of their apartments and maybe even their homes, and homes may be foreclosed upon. So we have the It is the king of economic scares, to put it mildly. Now, there's a couple things that may happen. Congress may rush in and then lift the debt ceiling, giving the U.S. government the ability to take on more debt, pay off its debts. But right now, the U.S. is liquidating assets to get the cash it needs to maintain it or to pay off its debts. We're at the point where the United States is selling stuff on Craigslist effectively. I'm joking, but have you ever been in one of those positions where you're like, I don't have any money, so it's time to sell the old guitar because I got to pay rent. That's kind of where we're at. Now, if Congress comes in and raises the debt ceiling, then we just take on more national debt. They'll borrow money from somewhere, they'll issue bonds, and then they'll get that money to pay things off. But the bonds work so long as people have confidence in the U.S. government. Those bonds will be paid back. They're kicking the can down the road. Plus, when it comes to the moratorium on evictions, if they extend the moratorium to December 31st, if Congress gets together and does this, well, then they're still just kicking the can down the road, and maybe that's the best we can do, or at the very least, it gives you some time to figure out what you need to do. But while this is happening, we're also hearing some scuttlebutt. Jack Posobiec says a White House official is saying that they're working on language about another national lockdown. Of course, Dr. Fauci says that's not going to happen. But considering what China is doing, locking down, the military being deployed in Sydney, I am of the opinion, boy, is it gonna get bad. And then eventually, I guess, when the next year, you will own nothing and you will be happy. There are shortages across the board. They're getting worse. Every time I do a segment on the economic issues that are happening right now, I can show you all of these stories about the economic crisis. But the big question right now is what's going to happen with the Delta variant? Because the reason we're in this mess to begin with is because we locked down 15 days to slow the spread. What if I were to tell you they are firing nurses because the nurses aren't getting vaccinated? And many nurses are protesting, saying they refuse. At the same time, there is a nursing shortage in many of these areas. It seems insane. There's one photo where nurses sang heroes during the pandemic, and now they're being, tossed out. And this is just some areas, but I'll tell you this. If we're supposed to get out of this crisis, and we have a labor shortage, a nursing shortage, a food shortage, a political crisis, it doesn't seem to be going too well for us. Now, I'm not trying to say it's the end of the world. These are just some stories. Like I mentioned, there are many stories that are saying everything is better than ever. So it's up to you to figure out what's best for you and what makes the most sense. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, constantly bringing up all these negative articles and everything, but perhaps this would just help you remain resilient. Be calm. Try and sort through this stuff. Like I said, some articles say the economy is recovering, the labor shortages are temporary, and that may be the case. But for now, we've got a couple other big issues on our hands. The debt ceiling, which has always been lifted, so maybe that will happen. And we've got the moratorium on evictions ending. Well, let's read this news and see exactly what's going on, and I will break down for you what the debt ceiling means. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get an ad-free experience on the website as you read our articles, but you'll also get access to our exclusive members-only content, of which right now is segments from the Timcast IRL podcast. But we are going to be launching a couple new shows. We've got a new show on mysteries and spooky stories, true crime, things like that. And now we are putting together a Dungeons and Dragons show that will explore different scenarios and how these ideas relate to modern politics. But it's not going to be a political show. Trust me, it's going to be cool stuff. And as a member, you'll get all of that. So go to timcast.com, sign up. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share the show with your friends. Let's read the first story from the Washington Examiner. U.S. hits debt ceiling, leaving Treasury a few months of runway with extraordinary measures. To put it simply, they are selling off their stuff to pay their bills. The Examiner reports the Treasury Department is embarking upon extraordinary measures to keep the United States temporarily from defaulting after the federal debt ceiling was reinstated and immediately became binding on Sunday. A 2-year congressional suspension of the debt ceiling expired Sunday, making the level of federal debt more than $28 trillion. The new ceiling, making more than $28 trillion the new ceiling. The Treasury is expected immediately to take emergency cash conservation steps to pay incoming bills without issuing debt over the limit. On Friday, it had already begun preparing for the deadline when it stopped selling state and local government series securities. The debt limit was paused at $22 trillion in 2019. National debt hit $22 trillion in April of that year. Less than a year after, it hit $21 trillion. Since then, federal spending grew massively over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. Congress must act to raise or suspend the cap, or the U.S. could fall behind on its obligations or fail to make a payment on the debt, a scenario that would have catastrophic effects on global financial markets. Raising the ceiling has resulted in tension in the past, as the party out of power has often demanded concessions for agreeing on an increase, because basically they have to agree. It's actually kind of a good thing. Republicans and Democrats are always fighting over certain things, and I think compromise is important. Not a big fan of the uniparty's authoritarianism, but we're dangerously close to this country being torn into shreds, and it may be inevitable to at this point. But the idea is we have to raise the debt ceiling. You need a certain number of votes. So long as there's no supermajority, the party in power says, okay, what do you want? Let's get it done. It's another kind of, filibuster of sorts. Now, right now, I think it may be too chaotic because the progressives are at odds with the establishment Democrats. So it's not even about the Republicans at this point. The Examiner says Josh Rosen, an adjunct economics professor at University of New Haven, told the Examiner that in the meantime, the Treasury will be taking steps to free up cash to pay incoming bills, such as redeeming investments in federal pension plans and essentially shedding assets to generate cash until Congress acts. Such fiscal maneuvers are referred to as extraordinary measures. I love how they say shedding assets. That's what I call it when I go on Craigslist and say, I've got a guitar to sell. I'm desperate for money. Yes, shedding assets. In a letter to congressional leadership, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen implored lawmakers to act and pointed out that no previous U.S. president or Treasury Secretary has ever entertained the notion of allowing the country to default on any obligation. The current level of debt reflects the cumulative effects of all prior spending and tax decisions, which have been made by administrations and Congresses of both parties over time, she wrote. Failure to meet those obligations would cause irreparable harm to the U.S. economy and the livelihoods of all Americans. Even the threat of failing to meet those obligations has caused detrimental impacts in the past, including the sole credit rating downgrade in the history of the nation in 2011. She added, highlighting when the U.S. was downgraded from AAA to AA+ by Standard & Poor's for the first and only time. Adding to the drama for the moment, Congress has been closely divided, and the 50-50 split Senate will need to have 10 Republicans join with all of the Democrats in order for the ceiling to be increased or paused by overcoming the filibuster. Although Democrats overcome that through budget reconciliation, where only a simple majority, including Kamala Harris's vote, is needed. This is a time bomb. As the country is divided right now, and you have 50-50 Democrat Republican. For the time being, there's enough establishment Republicans to just give the Democrats but what they want. But imagine the fissure in American politics splits and continues to the point where you have nationalist populist Republicans in the majority and you have establishment elite Democrats on the other side. And they say, we need 10 votes from you. And they say, you ain't gonna get it. And then the debt ceiling doesn't get lifted. And it would be, I would imagine the national populists were more likely to be happy with that because, well, it means that things will become less certain. It means that the establishment uniparty would lose control, but ultimately everybody would kind of lose out. Confidence would be lost in the U.S., and this could mean really, really bad things for everybody. Now, I want to show you this money supply thing real quick. I know I show this a lot, and a lot of people say, you don't understand it, you're wrong. Well, hold on. This is the M1 money stock, okay? It is billions of dollars seasonally adjusted, and you can see there's a couple things I want to show you. First, there's a major spike in 2020 because of COVID. And a lot of people have said, Tim, no, it's not a massive increase in the money stock. It's a change in how they track the money stock. If that's the case, look at from after they change it from May 2020 on to June 2021, there's still a dramatically large spike. So let me slow down. I want to tell you what I think is happening. From 1960 on, 1959, we can see the money supply has slowly been increasing. This is basically liquid assets, things that are available for trade, right? The money supply. Actually, let me just show you. They say before May 2020, it is currency outside the U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve banks, vaults of depository institutions, demand deposits at commercial banks. They say less cash items and process, blah, blah, blah. Checkable deposits consisting of negotiable order of withdrawal and automatic transfers, ATS, account depository institutions. Long story short, the cash that you have that you can't spend. What changed in May of 2020 was that because of COVID, they said you can now use your savings account like a checking account. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. Fact check me on that one, but I checked into it, but I'm not an economics expert. So my understanding is that this meant that all savings was now instantly viewed as liquid assets. The way they describe it is, first, before May, it was checkable deposits, and after May, it was liquid deposits. That's right. Liquid cash is in your savings. But that's not what's important. Here's what I kind of think may be happening. Around 2008, we see a major spike and a shift in the increase in the M1 money supply. We know that Barack Obama did that economic stimulus. It would seem that something really bad happened we all know, is the economic crisis, which led to a massive increase in the money supply, which brings us to this exact same position. They add savings to the money supply, hoping that people will have money to spend on things. But now everything has gone haywire. And even after they changed the reporting status, you still see the spike is dramatically larger and faster than it's ever been. I think we're having a heart attack, like a figurative one, a credit cardiac arrest, as it were, that the U.S. is struggling and desperately trying to reconcile the failing economic system. Because this Ponzi scheme can only go on for so long, where the U.S. just snaps its fingers and says, increase the debt ceiling. Hey, now we can borrow and spend more money. And then the U.S. issues bonds and people buy it and they have cash. They pay off their debts and then they got to pay that back later with interest. How do they do it? Now, the stimulus, there's been attempts at just flooding the, quantitative easing, flooding the system with money, desperately trying to pay things down, but it doesn't work forever. So where do we go? Well, I don't know for sure. I'm not an economist, okay? I just look at this and I'm like, hey, look at this blue hockey stick. That's freaky, right? It's the best I can put it. There's a big spike. But we know why we're here. And now we have this from Jack Posobiec. White House official this AM. Says lockdown speech being drawn up this week. They're planning to make it sound like one of the most solemn in history. Real Bush on the night of 9/11 type stuff. Would start stocking up if I were y'all. Jack's source could be wrong, but we do know that Jack Posobiec has sources in the White House because he's had numerous stories, I think most of them, confirmed that his sources come out and they say, and then, all right. But maybe it's wrong. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. It's one guy on Twitter saying, hey, here's someone who told me something. For all we know, this White House official got no idea what he's talking about. For all we know, the information is bad, and that may be the case. Jack previously stated that there were conversations within the White House that the second week of August, there were going to be more lockdowns and that basically all the blue states were on board with it. I wouldn't be surprised. In China, for instance, they're already saying numerous cities, millions are now being locked down because of the Delta variant. We see what's starting in China might reach the rest of the world. The military was deployed in Sydney. Yikes, man. So maybe. Now, when the first lockdowns hit, what did that really mean? I mean, we thought 15 days to slow the spread. We knew there was going to be a run on certain items. There was fear of gas shortages, but it turned out everybody went for the toilet paper. Okay. But this did result in a short-term supply disruption. So what happened was people ran to stores, bought as much as they could. And while there wasn't a shortage on most goods, they were taken from the shelves. So here's what would happen. You would go into Walmart. I did this. We went into our local Walmart, and there was no toilet paper. We asked them, and they said, we have toilet paper in the back. We just don't have our stockers here because they come in at night, or something to that effect. Like they just need to be restocked. So they were constantly trying to put more out. People were grabbing it. Because there was a massive spike of demand due to fear, everybody raided the shelves. And then within a couple of weeks, it was all back. Eventually, though, this had a ripple effect because of the shutdowns. Dairy producers, for instance, they load up big tanks with all that milk. They got to process it. They got to ship it. They got to bottle it. It's got to get made into cream and yogurt and all this stuff. And because of the disruptions in between, bottling plants, plastics, etc., they had nothing to do with the milk. So they just drained it all out, flooded it out. Farms were, I forget what it's called, but they were like, there was one thing I read about carrots, and they came in and just plowed over. So all the carrots got shoved back into the dirt, basically just recycled back into the dirt because there was no system by which they could start distributing this stuff. A lot of people said we need to get the food from these places and bring it to the city somehow, but there was a supply chain disruption. Now we're over a year into the lockdown. There was a brief period where restrictions were lifted and it seemed like we were going back to normal. And now it seems like we're diving right back in. I don't know if it's actually going to lock down. Maybe it won't. But what happens after the first lockdown we saw when things were going great, we lock down, boom, we get a shortage. We get weird short-term shortages. What happens when you have long-term labor shortages, staffing shortages, when you have resource shortages, when the factories can't produce, and then you lock down again? You will own nothing and you will be happy. From eat this, not that. 6 shortages Costco is facing right now. From tomato sauce to chicken nuggets, these are the items Costco is currently out of. Start planting your tomato plants now, my friends. We got so many tomatoes. We've been eating them like crazy. Just barely lightly breaded chicken breast chunks, shortage. Kirkland premium canned dog food, water. Okay, that one's freaky. They say, quote, we are currently out of water. Reads a sign posted near bottles of water next to another sign stating there's a limit of 5 cases of any brand per person at a Costco warehouse, according to a post on Reddit. There is not yet an ETA for our next delivery. We apologize for the inconvenience. People are going out and buying up water bottles. Now, fortunately for us out here in the middle of nowhere, we're partially off the grid. That means we have access to electricity and water and internet regardless of any hard lines. We're still like on the grid. I mean, you're on the internet, you know what I mean? But we have satellite. It's not that good. We have solar power. Not that good. We're getting better solar. And we have our own water sources, which is fantastic. Our water is amazing. But we will be dramatically limited on electricity if there is like a major outage. I don't think we're going to lose electricity, to be honest. But the water thing is concerning because many people in cities will not have access to water if the main municipal water supply is somehow damaged or shut down, which does happen. I don't see any reason for it to happen right now, mind you. I'm just saying, if people are buying up water and you can't get any, you might want to consider ordering some or having just a couple bottles or something in storage. I don't know what to say. Maybe get some of those big 5-gallon jugs or what are they 15-gallon or 5? I don't know, whatever 15-gallon. So here's what happened. There was an algal bloom in one of the Great Lakes, and then in Ohio, your water from your sink you couldn't drink. It was toxic or something like that. So people went out buying bottled water. That's why this is important. That's why bottled water I think is a great product. Not that I like the plastics or anything like that. Chips and oils. This was crazy to me. Costco CFO Richard Galanti recently discussed the rise in grocery prices and noted increased demand in various product categories, various shortages of everything from chips to oils and chemical supplies by facilities hit by the Gulf freeze and storms, and in some cases, higher commodity prices, tomato sauce. Now, this might seem to be like, okay, who cares about these particular things? Okay, that I get, fine. Maybe you don't care about tomato sauce, chips, or oils or whatever, but you got to understand this is surface level stuff. You go to Costco and you notice there's things missing. But what don't you see? Aluminum, maybe? Chlorine? What does that mean? A lot of people don't understand what goes into the manufacture of certain products. Helium is a really great example. You need helium, it's my understanding, for making things like computer chips. Could be wrong. I read this in a book a while ago. So check me on that one. And there's talk about how the U.S. supply of helium, and this is old talk, was like depleted and the U.S. didn't care about it. But you need helium. How do you get it? You mine it. Well, if there's a shortage of something obscure that you don't think matters, you don't realize that it eventually leads to other issues. Eventually, you'll notice, hey, why can't I get my new laptop? They're unable to produce the chips. Why? Well, it could be a hard lockdown stopping them from working, or it could be raw material breakdown. I'll tell you what freaks me out the most. All of this is the result of the lockdowns. Here's a story from KATU. Hospital staff shortages make matters worse in latest coronavirus wave. Portland, Oregon. As healthcare providers battle the latest the Delta variant, they say they are also dealing with an internal battle overcoming staff shortages. When everybody said, who cares about the unemployment from Joe Biden giving people $15, $16 an hour not to work? Who cares? We shouldn't work anyway. Universal basic income. Did anybody stop to think that not every job is making food? Did anybody stop to think that means certain people working in hospitals might be like, I'm going to go sleep on the beach for a couple months and just get my head right? And did anyone ever stop to consider that working in a hospital during a pandemic was extremely stressful and that people eventually would say, you know what? I can't take it anymore. And they'd leave. And then what? How do you stop a pandemic when your medical staff don't want to do it? Now, back in the day, you'd have community-based passions. People would say, I must fight for my community. Today, you don't have that. People are like, screw you. I'm going to do what I want. So they leave, take the paycheck. They don't want to be involved. And then no one's fighting the pandemic. Check out this story from Yahoo News. Nurses fired for not getting COVID-19 vaccine explain their rationale. Now, I always say, look, talk to your doctor about what's right for you. But should we really be firing nurses at a time when we got a nurse shortage? This is at Houston Methodist Hospital. They were fired for refusing to get the COVID vaccine. They say they appealed a judge's ruling that sided with the hospital's right to terminate their employment. Businesses do have a right to terminate you if you do not get the vaccine. They have a right to file a suit and challenge it by all means, but I think the business has that right. However, I also think it's kind of like, dude, we need nurses right now. Seriously. This one is from Fox 5, Washington, D.C. Nurse shortage, one of the many contributing factors to long ER wait times in the D.C. area. They go on to say that Fox 5's Ayesha Khan spoke with several healthcare professionals who aren't denying that emergency rooms are busier even before the pandemic hit. But it's not just because of the staff shortage. Patient volumes across the region have remained high, and we continue to see increased acuity of cases, explained Jock McInerney, manager of strategic communication and public relations with Suburban Hospital and Johns Hopkins Medicine. Parameters for diverting ambulances are set by the state of Maryland and D.C. Even if ambulances are being diverted, patients who arrive by car or other means are never turned away. All patients are triaged and treated in order of the severity of their condition. So without getting into too much detail there, this story is from July 21st, and we know there is a nursing shortage. We can see over in Texas from Cron, their health system is feeling the crunch of the latest COVID surge in the midst of a nursing shortage. So this one's from today, which brings me to the main point. Shortages, labor shortages, nursing shortages, all caused by the lockdown. If Congress doesn't act, we will see the U.S. default for the first time in I think, ever. And if they don't extend the moratorium on evictions, then people will be booted out by the millions. The system broke. That's all. The only thing I can say. It broke. Congress didn't raise the debt ceiling. Well, they better get to it, right? The moratorium on evictions has created this dependency on the system now. And we can't just keep extending it. Landlords got to get paid too. So then what? The government guarantees payment to landlords? Where does that money come from? Selling more bonds, taxing more people? What's the end result? A downward spiral of collapse. People don't work to make stuff. There's no stuff to sell. People are working and people aren't working. They're living for free. The government is footing the bill. Where does that money come from? Selling bonds? The debt ceiling starts to rapidly increase faster and faster. That's the point of showing you the M1 money supply. We are in a maelstrom, my friends. And the lower we go, the faster the spin gets. And then something changes. I don't know exactly what. I don't know how. But something big is coming. Broad shortages still plague manufacturers, ISM shows, and stunt economic recovery. As I've mentioned, there are articles saying the economy is recovering. It's better than ever. This is from today, from Market Watch. There is still broad shortages, labor shortages. How can we recover if people don't work? This story from Yahoo News. Exhausted restaurants turn to technology to address worker shortages. This could be, my friends, a great reset. I don't know about the great reset, but hey, what do you do when nobody wants to work? Well, install kiosks. And that's what we get from Yahoo News, mentioning that although the kiosks might not be the best answer because of COVID and, touching all the screens, people are getting mobile apps. You can type in on your mobile app your order, walk in, pick it up, and walk out. That's actually a lot better, to be completely honest. But what do? Just fire their staff? These are cultural issues. People like walking in, talking to a human and saying, I want X, do it. Now we're moving to an era where people don't want to work at these places. I see signs up everywhere for major bonuses. $1,000, come work for Wendy's or something. Why? We don't need them. You can get a robot to make the burger. I'm not even kidding. The burger goes through gets dropped, goes to a conveyor belt, lands on a bun, little robot arm puts a bun on, puts all the good little, fixins on it. There's these little robots they have at, what are they, like rest stations, service centers on highways. There's like a little robot and he like grabs the cup and then he like pulls the lever and then he puts the sprinkles on it. We got robots, man. Robots are going to do the work for us. It's a technological revolution. How do you prevent the revolts and riots of the Industrial Revolution this time around? Well, nobody's working. So this way, the new latest Industrial Revolution won't result in people rioting and, the Luddites and stuff like that. But then they don't got jobs. Then they're dependent. So what do we move to? The government guarantees people money, some kind of universal basic income. They don't work. They can't be evicted. I think this is a really great experiment. I don't mean great in a good way. I think this is a great experiment that I'm not confident in. I don't have all the answers. We got a lot of people on this planet. Check out this story from Business Insider. Talking robot is serving restaurant customers in California because the manager can't find enough workers during the labor shortage. Okay. This is the way things are now, I suppose. From the Daily Beast. From the Daily Mail. Absolute catastrophe from Joe and Kamala. Republicans slam president's migrant crisis as drone captures wave of 1,000 new migrants being held at Texas Border Patrol. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just laying on bad news after bad news after bad news. We've got an economic crisis. We've got an eviction crisis. We've got food and labor shortages. We've got a nursing shortages during a pandemic. And now we can see that Joe Biden has shuffled in 1.2 million people into a country in crisis. Wow. So here's how I feel. Congress couldn't get the debt ceiling lifted as of now. What are they doing? Where are they at? Biden couldn't get the eviction moratorium extended. He went to the court. The court said no. He went to Congress. Congress couldn't do it. Now they're like, Biden, quick, do something. He's like, I literally can't. Nobody can do anything. I don't know. The system's broken. This month's going to get crazy. At the end of the month, we have this report coming out about the lab leak. Republicans are already claiming they've concluded that it happened, that it was leaked in Wuhan. And this feels like the fourth turning, I guess, the crisis period. This month seems like it's going to get really, really crazy, like a culmination of everything. We just had the eviction moratorium and we just had the suspension of the debt ceiling end at the same time. And there's a lack of nurses, man. I got to say, it kind of feels a bit grandiose, like big. The Wall Street Journal opinion, from the Wall Street Journal opinion section. What if we're reliving the 70s with no Reagan to save the day? Today, almost the entire establishment is steeped in the orthodoxy that has produced this malaise. I don't know, man. But maybe Joe Biden's no Reagan. Reagan had his problems. I wasn't actually, you know what? Was I alive for Reagan? When did Reagan get? 88? Yeah, I was 2. I think I was alive for Reagan. And then it was George H.W. Bush from, 88 to 92. And then we had Clinton for a long time. So I don't know. I don't remember this stuff. I know that there was a period where my family was content. You know, we had dinner on the table. My dad worked a couple jobs. I don't know where we go from here. I go back to that tweet from Jack Posobiec where his source says, would start stocking up if I were y'all. You know, look, I'm not trying to tell anybody to panic or anything like that, because you definitely shouldn't. If you go to these stores, people go to these stores, they buy up a bunch of stuff, and then they realize it expires in 6 months, and now you've just taken food away from someone who needs it. You know, you're not going to eat all that. You're not going to eat beans every day. But I will tell you, you should have a general stock. You should have some emergency food, not a lot. You should have some emergency water, not a lot. You should have a first aid kit, because you never know if it might rain or flood, and you'll need food and water. But considering what we've been seeing, considering what we saw last year, when they were like 15 days, and then I was like, I'm going to go get some emergency food. We ended up eating it. I ordered a bunch more. It's great because you just heat up, you pour the thing in the pot with water and you heat it up and you got food. So we didn't have to worry about going to the stores and fighting with people. I remember we were, as somebody who reads the news every day, and that's an understatement, like 12 to 16 hours of news every day. We went to the store immediately and just made sure we had a standard stock. We had our pantry with, you know, our normal amount of food. We didn't go crazy, but normally we didn't care because the store was right there. So we'd be like, we're out of this, that, or otherwise, and whatever, we'll get it when we get it. This time I was like, look at what's going on. Let's go to the store. And then we made sure we had enough. We had a handful of people living there. Now I've got, you know, the people who, a lot of people who work here. And so we're trying to make sure we're taking care of everything. So I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. I'm going to tell you what I would do. That's a better way to put it. I've got some emergency food, emergency water, a bit more nowadays, like a decent amount. That's because we've got a couple dozen employees and we want to make sure we can continue to function, bring you information, news, and opinion to the best of our abilities and produce content. And I started I bought these batteries. Now we had a power outage out here a couple weeks ago and we used the batteries to do the show. Like, that's what I tell people. It doesn't matter if the world ends. Sometimes the power goes out. So we have these emergency solar batteries. And people would, you know, on the left are like mocking the idea of prepping or whatever. And I'm like, bro, we have batteries. We need them. It's like a backup generator. People buy these things. Just think about this. Think about this. How crazy is it that people can spend thousands of dollars on a generator, and then if you buy one bucket of food, emergency food for like $50, they call you a prepper? Get with it, dudes. Stop being ridiculous. You live in these big cities. You got no generator on your roof. You live out in the middle of nowhere. People have backup generators. You live in the big cities. People don't get water or food for emergencies. So I'm not going to be one advocate. I will always say get out of those cities. Now, I think it's very likely Congress will raise the debt ceiling. I think it's very likely there'll be some kind of payout to prevent this major eviction crisis. But it's not a guarantee. I just don't know. So I don't want to be the harbinger of bad news. Maybe this is realism, though. And I can pretend and say, you know what? I'm going to ignore all of this stuff, but it's only getting worse. Remember a couple months ago when I was like, what's up with these shortages? Like, how come the major news outlets aren't reporting this? Now we got more and more and more shortages. It didn't go away. It's just there's more stories. So I don't know what'll happen in the future. I'm just commenting on what the news we're seeing now is. There's definitely other stories that probably contradict this because the news is a mess. So make sure you're paying attention. Investigate and do what's right for you. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.